Didn't even make it 3 goddamn days, huh? Okay. Folks who've heard me speak on the matter know that The Grudge, the Japanese original and the American-produced remakes from the turn of the millennium, are among the only mainstream horror films produced in my adult lifetime that legitimately scare the piss out of me. It's not even so much the movies themselves, which are all varying degrees solidly produced examples of the J-horror boom of their period. It's Kayako, the twitchy, long-haired ghost thing that crawls around and makes the croaking noise. For whatever reason, that fucking thing scares the bejesus out of me. And I can't even explain why. Like, she's even creepy in the Ring vs. Grudge crossover movie, and that was played for a joke. So if there's a quick shortcut to knowing whether or not this new one is any good, it didn't scare me. You know, which is both the only thing even a bad horror film is supposed to be good for, and something even the less good Grudge movies had previously been good at. So make of that what you will. Now, frustratingly, while not exactly scary or particularly memorable or effective, it's not actually what I'd otherwise call an outright bad movie. It's handsomely produced, brings an impressive amount of mood, atmosphere, and sense of place from an extremely low budget, avoids cheap shocks or unearned jump scares for the most part, and instead tries its best to make its bones, pardon the pun, the old-fashioned way, putting a cast of solid actors doing serious performances through the rigors of what is on paper an extremely dark and unsettling narrative, courtesy director Nicholas Pesci, whose Eyes of My Mother announced him as a potential next big thing horror helmer a few years back. Plus, as much of a sucker as I am for the signature creatures and aesthetic of the original entries in the series, what I was most looking forward to in this apparent second remake was the ostensible promise of seeing the material more fully reinterpreted. See, for those new to the franchise, the original Japanese feature, Ju-On, was effectively a downbeat haunted house movie with a subtle twist. Rather than dealing with more explicitly acknowledged ghosts, the unnatural poltergeist-esque apparitions are meant to be understood here as remnants of psycho-spiritual dark energy unleashed during the brutal murder-suicide in an otherwise mundane suburban Japanese home, and now bonded and reverberating violently within the structure of the home itself, manifesting as a psychic sickness that infests anyone who so much as steps inside the door, and appearing to those infected as the vengeful spirits of corpse-like figures of the mother, child, and father who died therein. The first Western Grudge remake from over a decade ago, helmed by the same director as the original, actually maintained the Japanese setting, but added an American main character played by Sarah Michelle Gellar as an audience POV character, which made for some interesting cross-cultural juxtapositions, but also fundamentally altered the intended context of the original aesthetic, i.e. exoticizing the surroundings and evil manifestations, which had been noteworthy in their original context for fusing an almost banal everyday Japanese reality with subtle references to cultural ghost mythology. So my hope for this remake, being set entirely in the United States and centering on a begrudged home in a dust-blown town in the American Midwest with its own reimagined versions of the ghost, cursed, grudge, whatever, family creatures, unrelated to the original, would have a fresh new feeling and something genuinely compelling to offer. There's obviously plenty of room to build out and move around in such a simple premise, and it looks like that's what they started out trying to do, as the main story follows Andrea Riseborough, who's very good here, as a recently widowed single mom cop in a new town who learns about a mysterious house connected to a case that drove her new partner's previous companion mad, and makes the mistake of stepping inside to try and investigate, and now has grudge ghosts on the brain. Her investigation tracks backward to a set of flashbacks that reveal the previous successive occupants of the house as she tries to piece together the origins of the curse, or whatever it is, and how to thwart it before it claims her and her son, allowing a showcase for experienced character performers such as Lynn Shay, Betty Gilpin, Damian Bashir, Frankie Faison, and William Sadler to shine in key roles and set up what looks like it might have at one point been a decent new tweak in the central mystery, but unfortunately it also looks like they may have lost the courage of that conviction between the start and finish of production, because whatever angle the story started out taking looks to have been somewhat awkwardly swapped out with an additional layer of flashback plotting that attempts to ham-fistedly tie the new story and the new ghost back to Kayako and the events of the original Ju-On movies, which feels weirdly unnecessary and also self-defeating, given that the only people who could possibly care about that level of continuity protectiveness in this kind of movie are the very people who will tell you that the franchise is now violating its own rules. Not that that's the only problem either, just the most indicative of the ham-handed measures that were taken at some point, presumably late in the game. The film has atmosphere to spare, the actors all keep up appearances, but the dramatic payoff to the buy-in of all this bleak seriousness never really really amounts to anything, and it makes viewing such a downbeat film kind of a chore. There's no real excitement. The manifestations are suitably spooky in execution, but they aren't what you'd call iconic in the game-changing way the originals were. You've seen ghosts like this elsewhere many times. They aren't that interesting, and while I'll give credit for not going down the route of either cheap shocks or just joking around with it in a schlock comedy sense, at a certain point you have to ask what a horror film that doesn't have any visceral charge or a point behind it is trying to accomplish. So I can't call this a poorly made or bad effort, but I also can't say there's much to it or that it seems to have a reason for existing other than reminding everyone that Ghost House owns this trademark. So let's call it a 4 out of 10, but it's, January. It's not like you were gonna run out and see this anyway.